the House of Representatives in 3 lines or 3 sentences over time directly in relation to the proportion of the population. Meaning, as long as the population continues to grow, the size of the House of Representatives is supposed to grow. And it actually worked out better. With today's technology, it would not be that difficult to have 6,000 people. It really would not. And you could also run for Congress, the House of Representatives, by knocking on doors. 50,000 people. I don't know how many people live in Medford, but I mean, there's a lot of municipalities that have a lot less than 50, a lot more than 50,000 people.
That makes sense. You would be better represented.
Of course, and you wouldn't have to pay a lobbyist to talk to your representative in Congress. And more importantly, anyone could run, and it would also take a lot of the corruption out because, like I said, you guys are raising money for Lonigan. You're supporting Lonigan. He needs money. That's because the system is broken. He can't run without money. In the system as it was supposed to be, it's not about money.
Good. Could we cut their pay by, like, Paul? I'd say 95%.
Well, it's not my fault, because the reality is you don't want a scenario where only rich people can be in Congress, because it is a full-time job. But that's
No, well, but if you cut their pay, then other people will run, because if it becomes less lucrative from a,
Yeah, but they decide
from an
not to pay.
honest
I'm gonna
and a
do that as a
corruption
constitutional amendment.
standpoint, then maybe good people will run instead of crooks.
Well, if you have a scenario where you're running in a race of universe of 50,000 people that are voting for you, you know, you can have credible people that are running because they want to make a difference. And if they're lousy, it's a lot easier to get rid of them. And if they're good, it's a lot easier to get them in. Entry level to run for Congress right now is a couple $1 million to lose a race. Do you want to play that game? No, thanks. You know, poor Lonigan's running up and down the state begging for money instead of talking largely about issues because he has to. You know, is that the process you think that our forefathers contemplated for us? They fought about a bank. They didn't want to have a national bank. Millions and millions of dollars. So back to the issue about.
Please take the second.
Article the second is now actually deemed and acknowledged as ratified and promulgated. Article the second would have made it illegal for Congress to vote themselves a pay raise that went into effect until they stood for election once. It's called essentially referred to as the salary grab amendment, meaning as they're going out of office, they can say, "I hereby give me $1 million." You know, you would have to stand for election one time before you could benefit from any pay raise that you voted for. And in fact, that's an integral part of the story because in mid-1980s, a gentleman by the name of Gregory Watson in Texas started a movement which largely began the political career of the present Speaker of the House. And that was to try and get Article the Second ratified, because another issue is, separate from the fact that Article the First was ratified 220 years ago, if enough states, once it's proposed, as long as there's no limitation in the language itself, it can always be ratified once the states get around to it. So in the 80s, angry that Congress wasn't doing what they wanted, members of the state legislature in the different states started supporting ratifying Article the Second. Now, what most of you people don't know, because again, they don't talk about it, but this is the truth, in 1992, specifically May, enough states, I think it was 38 states, had ratified Article the Second. So Article the Second was ratified, and it was deemed promulgated in a certificate from the archivist, which you can just Google. Don't take my word. I didn't bring that because I have enough stuff, and I'm probably not going to get to most of that. Don't take my word for it. Google it, and it gets better. The archivist's ratification does not include Kentucky's ratification. They missed it. And if you think that's not weird, Greg Watson wanted to try and get every state to ratify Article the Second. So even after it was deemed part of the Constitution, he contacted Kentucky because he didn't know about Kentucky. I found out about Kentucky. And he convinced the Kentucky legislature in 1996 to ratify Article the Second, which they did, fully unaware that they had done so in 1792. Now, let me come forward because I don't want to keep you here all night. I want to get to the meat of the interesting stuff and then let you people get on with your eating. As I gave you the blue book going around the room 100 years in, let's fast forward to 150 years in. There was a gentleman by the name of Sol Bloom. Great guy. He was a member of the House of Representatives. He was from New York. Sol Bloom was a performer. Before he went to Congress, he was best known as he brought a thing called the Algerian Review to the Chicago World's Fair. It's a fancy way of saying he was a go-go bar. 1878's version of a go-go bar. This is the truth. He later goes on to Congress, and he's put, because he's a showman, they have the George Washington 200th anniversary. He's in charge of that. It makes a fortune. So we now have the 150th anniversary of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. So 100 years in, they have that book out there, right? 150 years in, mid-1930s, they're getting ready for the 150th anniversary of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. There was a gentleman from Massachusetts by the name of LaVergne Saltonstall. He was the governor of Massachusetts. You may recognize his name. He was later the senior senator from Massachusetts when JFK was a junior senator. In any event, he had future aspirations in the mid-1930s. Since John Adams was from Massachusetts, he was the first vice president, second president, Saltonstall thought that he could get some national press and mileage out of taking a lead in the celebration of the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. At which point, a research librarian by the name of Dennis Myers pulled that book that I showed you and said, Governor, I don't know how to tell you this, but according to the Department of State, Massachusetts never actually ratified the Bill of Rights. Now, mind you, LaVergne Saltonstall went to Harvard undergraduate, went to Harvard Law School, and he says, what? What do you mean they didn't? What do you mean Massachusetts didn't ratify the Bill of Rights? To which Dennis Myers said, no, they didn't ratify any of the 12. To which Saltonstall said, what do you mean there were 12? There were 10, right? Now, this is the governor of Massachusetts, Harvard-educated lawyer, and Harvard-educated undergraduate. Now, once again, we now know that in the mid-1930s, they discovered, gee, once again, no information about Connecticut, Georgia, or Massachusetts. So one would have thought that they would have done what I had done and go back into the archives to see whether anything was done. But no, they didn't do that. What they did is in 1939, in preparation for the party, they got the 3 states of Connecticut, Georgia, and Massachusetts to pass resolutions ceremonially post-ratifying so that for the party they could tell history. All 13 original states ratified the Bill of Rights. So while technically true, it's severely misleading. And fast forward, and that's essentially how it got lost in history. Now, I don't want to keep you here all night, so I'll move on to a couple things real quick, and then I'll be done, and then I'll answer any questions you have. The issue is, what do we do? The answer is people are going to have to address this issue. But people have to know about it first. They have to believe that it's true. And the only way to believe that it's true is for me to finish a book or for you to start telling people, say, I saw this guy. I looked at this stuff myself. This is actually true. I'm not sure what we do, but we have to do something. You can't do nothing because the Constitution, if I were to ask you where the actual version, official version of the Constitution is, could you tell me? And I'll save you time. There is none. That's a whole other story because of the way the process went. And let me tell you a couple things about how things got lost in history. Okay. You may have read in the newspaper one of the original printings of the laws, an act of Congress. It was owned by George Washington, was purchased back by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association for just shy of $11 million a year ago, June. They wanted to bring it back to Mount Vernon. There was an auction at Christie's, and they paid what they had to bring it home. Well, I then called them up and I said, there's a typo. Actually, there's 2. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, all right, what we today call Article 8, right? It says cruel and unusual punishments, right? That's what the Constitution says, right? Yeah. I said, look at your page 92. You pass it around you. I'm going to pass around to you George Washington. This is called copy of George Washington's copy, and this is page 92 and 93. Now there's 2 typos. One in Article the 1st, which is almost impossible to see, and one in Article the 10th, which is blatant. Once again, I'm sorry you're sitting there. Can you read that aloud?
The enumeration in the 10th Constitution again?
Can you read it aloud? So Article the 10th, this one.
Oh.
Excessive bail.
It says,
Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual, what's that word? Imprisonments. Inflicted. Now let me ask you a question. What we today call the 8th Amendment, does it prohibit cruel and unusual imprisonments or cruel and unusual punishments? Okay, well, take my word for it, read. The first official printing had a mistake in Article the 1st that was almost impossible to recognize, and a mistake in Article the 10th that was rather blatant. And fast forwarding to 1791, I'm going to show you Jefferson's copy. Jefferson's copy, Washington's copy was purchased back by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. Jefferson's copy is at the Lilly Library in Bloomington, Indiana. And Jefferson, being Jefferson, caught the mistake. And corrected it. And he corrected it. And I'll tell you when he caught the mistake. He caught the mistake, and again, pass that around. He caught the mistake during February of 1791 when Vermont was getting admitted as a state. Because, like I said, they were both admitted in February 1791. But Vermont became a state March 4th. Kentucky had to wait. Now, as the Secretary of State, your job is to send your welcome aboard to the country package to Vermont. And so, in preparing and reviewing things, he said, wait a second, this is a mistake. So he actually prepared a separate handwritten copy of the amendments and sent them to Vermont because of that. And because of that, they also passed a resolution authorizing a corrected printing of the laws. And I'm not going to go off into the tangent there, but the point is, there have been loads of mistakes in history that have been glazed over. But this one's a big one because it affects everyone. It affects the representation. It affects the selection of the president. This is not a lie. This is the truth. And so I'm here tonight to ask you for nothing more than to have listened to me, to understand that this is real. This is real. And the next question is, what do we do? Well, I'm doing everything I can to get word out about this, because this is how you fix the country. The people are the answer to this country. Not those 435 yutzes in Congress that can't get together about anything. That we're paying millions of dollars for. Millions of dollars.
They know what we can trust in this.
And at some point, you have to take a step back and say, I'm not putting up with this anymore. But the difference is, I have an answer. You don't have to call a constitutional convention. The Founding Fathers gave us the answer. All you have to do is acknowledge it. I'll close with this before you answer any questions. There's a thing called not a kaleidoscope, but what's the thing with the, I guess it's not,
It's
I
a
guess it is a
kaleidoscope.
kaleidoscope.
It is.
Not a kaleidoscope. You look through and
Changes the triangles and
it
stuff.
changes slightly.
Yeah, it's a kaleidoscope.
Okay, and it changes the way. Sorry, tired. All you have to do is tap it a little bit, and it'll change everything. And the change here is already in place. We don't have to get any other states to ratify it. But what you have to get to do is get the people to open their eyes and acknowledge that which is undeniably true. And then let the people, in a fair process, come up with the solutions to solving what is facing this country today. And not just blindly rely upon other people that we have to give money to that we know aren't going to do anything. Because let me close by saying this. Lonigan and Booker, whoever wins that race, it doesn't matter. And I don't mean that in a bad way against either, because it's not like the other 99 members of Congress are saying, gosh, we can't do anything till Lonigan or Booker get here. It's the system. It's broken. But here's the answer. And you don't have to do anything else other than open your eyes. I'll close with this. The poet laureate during the mid-90s was a guy by the name of Robert Pinsky. He grew up in Long Branch, and I'm more of a, I read stuff that puts most people to sleep. To me, poetry is boring, so I don't know what, it's all irrelevant. The point is, poets speak in a different way. My father's an artist. My father painted the official portrait of Robert Pinsky when he was the poet laureate that's hanging today in the Library of Congress. They had a big celebration and a big fancy luncheon in the Madison branch of the Library of Congress in front of a big statue of James Madison. And Pinsky gave a short piece of poetry that day. And he wanted it to encapsulate, because he referred to, first he says, we're holding this meeting here in a house of memory. Now, only a poet would refer to as a library as a house of memory, but it's completely appropriate. I call libraries libraries. He calls it a house of memory. That's why he's the poet laureate, and I'm me. But a memory is only as good as the people that pay attention. Meaning your memory can be foggy and wrong. And sometimes we need to correct our memory. And he had a piece of poetry he said that day. He says, "A country is the things it wants to see. If not, some part of me must want to see those things." I thought about that for 20 years, and in many respects that led me to look. And boy, did I find something. So I hope I haven't bored you to tears. I normally, I could speak for hours without papers, as I'm sure you already know. I have loads of things that I haven't even shown you. But all I wanted you to understand is this thing about Article the First, it is not a myth. It is the truth. What is a myth is what we have right now. And the only way to do something about it is to get the word out that this is not a myth. So having said that, I thank you for your time, your indulgence, your patience.
One thing that you didn't mention is that you're showing us we have a ratified amendment
Yes.
from the Bill of Rights,
Yes.
Article the First. What you didn't mention is, and you mentioned this to me once before, is that there's a difference between ratification and notification.
Ratification and promulgation.
Okay? And they're two different words.
It's an old thing. Once an amendment is ratified, it's law. But for people to acknowledge it's law, that's essentially promulgation. And all that is acknowledging that it's the law. If a tree falls in the woods, does it make a noise? I don't know. Is there someone there to hear it? Yes? No. In constitutional parlance, if once an amendment's ratified, it's the law. Yes.
Who have you brought this to the attention?
Everyone that should have been listening. The archivist knows, the Speaker of the House knows. There was a lawsuit that I brought 2 years ago, arguing that the courts, and the problem we have is Article 3 courts don't want to get involved in the Constitution. Now, I know a little bit about the U.S. Supreme Court, because I've been there 3 times, including representing Frank Lautenberg, when he was a sitting senator before the United States Supreme Court. And in that case, ironically, the court said, we can't hear this. They wouldn't even let me in a courtroom to say no. And the irony is, the trial judge was a guy by the name of Peter Sheridan, who in 2004 in that race, before Judge Garrett Brown, and it's a long story, but I was the only person that argued about the 17th Amendment. But the point is, I'm doing anything and everything that I can. They said it's a non-justiciable claim, meaning the court can't do anything about it, which isn't true. And in fact, it's very expensive, even when you do this work yourself to bring this litigation. I'm preparing to file an application against the archivist under the the Administrative Procedure Act, because there's a statute that requires the archivist to promulgate it once he receives official notification. I've given them official notification by way of me providing certified copies from Connecticut and Kentucky. They're essentially taking the position it's not official until Kentucky tells us. And Connecticut tells us. Like, I sent you a certified copy. So that's the next step. But again, once again, all this stuff is very expensive. Like I said, these books that I'm passing around, first you got to find them, then you got to pay for them. I'm doing all this on my own. I'm not doing fundraising. I'm doing this because I'm trying to fix the country for my children.
So we get this out, and we have the archivist acknowledge that yes, this is the case. Then we have the problem of 435 people that are in the way of actually making this get implemented.
Once the archivist promulgates it, it's law. It's like
It's
Article
not their
2.
call.
I want to start talking because I know you people want to go home. But with Article the 2,
Maybe not.
Well, maybe not. I don't know. With Article the 2, which was promulgated in 1992, there was a, pardon my language, pissing contest as to who was going to say thumbs up. They couldn't disagree with the numbers. But because with the 14th Amendment, there was an attempt by some states to rescind ratification, which Congress said, we're not acknowledging that. You voted. Congress, through Senator Byrd, took the position, yes, it's law, but we get to pass the resolution saying it's law. And the archivist says, well, the statute passed in 1818 that's been forwarded up to me says that I say when it's the law. And it's a mathematical process. And the Office of Special Counsel to the OLC, Office of Legal Counsel to the President, issued a formal legal opinion saying Congress has nothing to do with it. Once the archivist receives notice, he is obligated to promulgate. And in fact, in that case, in 1992, much to the anger of the Senate and the House of Representatives, the archivist at the time just promulgated it and published it in the Federal Register. 2 days later, Congress, all angry, passed a resolution. Well, we agree, but okay, we can't give ourselves pay raises. Okay, but basically, The Constitution says what it says. It's not a complicated document. The problem is when you go to law school, they teach constitutional law without people reading the Constitution. Yes, sir.
I might have missed something for a second, but how does Congress keep giving themselves a pay raise if it's illegal?
Because they violate the law. Well, let me explain that. Here's the other answer to that. There's what's called COLA, cost of living increases. And so the way they get around it, because there was actually an application brought because to stop that, because Congress is giving themselves automatic pay raises under COLA. I don't know about you, but I get up and I go to work. I don't go to play, and I don't get paid if I don't go to work, and I don't get an automatic pay raise. You know, and so the answer to that is it's very similar to what's going on right now with Syria. The courts are saying COLA, it's a non-justiciable question. They're basically avoiding it on procedural grounds. But it's one of these things that people aren't that upset about because they don't really know. But that's the answer. Yes.
Eugene, people in this room know.
Now, I have a question. In your research, when you researched the documents in the archives in D.C.,
Yes.
and then you went to each of the states?
Yes.
Now, if I'm correct, when a document is sent from the Department of State, that Congress has agreed upon, it goes out to the states, they can't touch a T, they can't touch an I, they can't do nothing. They either say yay or nay. Now, my question is, did you find any documents tampering with? One. And two, that being the case, is any of this referencing in your material, in this book you're going to do?
The answer to that is there's been no tampering. There's been mistakes. I showed you one.
Well,
Cruel and
was it the
unusual
original-
imprisonments
Yeah, I saw
and
that.
punishments.
What I'm asking is, when the original document leaves Washington for the states to vote on, from my understanding, the states cannot tamper with it.
No, that's correct. That's
They
correct.
have to accept it or reject
As
it.
written, correct.
Now, what you found is in your book,
Inconsistencies.
and is it clearly stated of this? Most people don't understand that.
Sure. Well, let me explain that.
Yeah.
When something is sent, and I have what you guys can look at, because like I said, I could talk for 15 hours. People would, I don't want to do that because I want you to be my friends. There are some things I brought because when they originally passed the so-called Bill of Rights, the 12 amendments, right? The process was as follows. It was a $2 bill. They didn't know what to do because if it was a bill, a law, there was a process. It required 3 readings. It had to be reduced to paper, and so on and so forth. This was not a law. They didn't know
You
what
had
to
to
do.
pass the bill to know what was in it.
Well, yes.
I was just checking.
Theoretically.
I know you're thinking Obamacare.
All right.
Theoretically. But what happened is they were going out of session. They didn't know what to do. And so when they did the final reading of this, there was no one document. They had notes, reports, and paste stuff all over the place. The problem is the clerks made mistakes when they did the hand engrossed copies and when they did the printed copies. But let me answer your question quite quickly. There's a thing called the Scrivener's error doctrine in the law. Meaning, if you write something that's clearly wrong, the courts aren't going to say, oh, well, sorry, that says imprisonments, we can kill you. We just can't, when you're in prison, we can't torture you. We can, like the stuff in Guantanamo Bay, no, that's cruel and unusual because they were imprisoned. But we can kill you, because it's basically along the lines of, there's a Gary Larson, I'm dating myself because he was a guy that had a comic strip in the 80s and 90s. And there's one thing where these guys are flying, and there's a guy on an island with tattered shorts, and he has H-E-L, and the P had been hit by the waves, so it said health, and they have the guys that obviously from the Coast Guard, oh, wait a second, it says health, must not be him. The point being, if there are mistakes, they just correct them. And they did that with the imprisonments issue. They just didn't recognize the mistake in Article the First until the until like 1797. And in fact, in 1797, Jonathan Dayton, who was from New Jersey, he was the Speaker of the House at the time, actually, and I have that, I can pass that around if you want to see that, because they didn't know whether the suitability of the States Amendment had been ratified. So at that point, Senator Tazewell from Virginia, at this time Jefferson had effectively been elected president but hadn't taken office. Adams was pissed off. This is going into 1797. He takes off. Adams is supposed to take office in March of 1797. The new Fifth Congress starts May, but they still are meeting from December till March 4th. And Tazewell from Virginia says, we don't know anything whether the article dealing with the suitability of the states, which is the next amendment in progression proposed, what we today call the 11th Amendment, was ratified. So Tazewell gives an opinion saying, these amendments have been ratified. By the way, that report says we have nothing from Connecticut, Georgia, or Kentucky, or Connecticut yet. And but they said, all right, we're only going to look, we want to ask about this 11th Amendment, about the suitability of the States Amendment. That goes to the House. And they send it to a committee. The House then has a committee of Federalists that say, whoa, 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 whoa. The Senate says that some of these amendments were ratified. None of these have been ratified according to us, our reading of 3/4, some weird math theory which was summarily rejected. But there's an actual House report, which I can show you, saying none of the amendments were ratified in February 1797. And then Dayton says, wait, and the House said, because none were ratified, we think that the Senate's resolution should be changed so that instead of just asking about the suitability of the States Amendment, we should ask about all of them. And Jonathan Dayton, who was the Speaker of the House, said, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't want to ask about Article the First. In fact, we should ask states that have ratified Article the First to call it back. That's a mess. We don't want that. And so, without checking, they made an affirmative decision only to check. You know, I know I keep saying I'll close, but you ever watch Seinfeld? No. There's an episode with George Costanza, and he gets it in his head that this girl's going to break up with him. And she didn't want to break up with him, but he figures, all right, I don't want to break up with her, so as long as I don't take her phone call, she's still my girlfriend. So he's like, I can't hear you. So he wouldn't take the phone calls. He wouldn't take the phone call. And ultimately, she was just asking him to go to a wedding, but by the time she finally got through, she was so frustrated and pissed off that she broke up with him. But the point being, that's what's going on right now. You know, that's what was going on in 1797. The Speaker of the House says, I can't hear you. We don't want to talk about that, because then we don't have the power to decide how powerful we are. And Jonathan Dayton, who you may or may not know, was from New Jersey. He's most inimicably known in history as being an indicted co-conspirator with Aaron Burr for treason, although he was never brought to trial. The sad thing is that wasn't his biggest act of treason. I've just told you his biggest act of treason. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Are you flying this mission solo, or do you have others in your camp?
Let me explain that. I have a group of people that have formed together called the Democratic Republican Party of New Jersey. And what they really are is, that's why Len Marshall's here tonight. Len was one of the founders with Tom Lundquist of the real New Jersey Conservative Party. I fought for their rights for how many years? 5, 10 years in court?
10 years, oh, absolutely.
Every time they would get thrown off the ballot, fighting for their rights for ballot access and things like that, fighting for them constantly. Len is part of this organization, former member of the Conservative Party. Conversely, there's another fellow, Tracy Caprioni, who is what I would refer to politely as a Birkenstock-wearing liberal tree hugger. And it runs the gamut from everyone. There's Democrats, Republicans, all different people that are part of this organization. People don't agree upon all issues. You ask some people what they think about the Second Amendment. I saw someone here say, well, what do you think about guns? My answer is, I prefer ground rules. Having said that, the three things that the organization that we formed agree upon is that the government as it exists is broken. And the financial system with regard to campaign finance is broken. That's one component. The second is, Article the First is the law. We want it acknowledged, promulgated, and put into effect, because that is the answer to the country's problems. And the third is what we call the Change the Rules Pledge. I actually had a press release in front of Independence Hall with everyone on September 17th and on the 220th anniversary of the Constitution. And it was quite a thing. And the theory is, if you want to pass it around, but basically what it is I don't want to start talking politics here, but I'm going to answer your question. Please. Because specifically, you want to know the components to fix the country are the follows. First, acknowledge that it's broken, okay? The 435 people in Congress, they're not solving the problem, okay? Lonergan and Booker, both in their own right, nice guys, no matter who gets elected, your life's not going to change, okay? Why is that? Okay, so the system is broken. How do you fix it? You promulgate